There's a specific verse within this passage that stops me in my tracks. And it's that verse that says, we came into the world with nothing, and we will take nothing with us. How countercultural for us, especially living in such a capitalistic country, especially living in a world that says you need more, you need to possess more, you need a bigger house, a better car, a better driveway, you need all of these things to find happiness. And yet, these ancient words are still speaking truth to us about what it means to truly have godly contentment. Saying godly contentment that says, sure, those possessions and those things are nice. Sure, nice clothes feel good. Sure, a new car smells good for a few years. And you can't take it with you. In fact, someone after the service said to me this morning, you can't take it with you, and you're going to leave it with your family when you leave. You can't take it with you. Godly contentment, so upside down of what our world says. But as people of faith, our response is supposed to be, I have enough. I am enough because Christ is enough. Because God is enough. I have enough. I am enough. While the rest of the world is shouting at us all of the enoughs that we're supposed to be. Not smart enough, not successful enough, not this enough, not fill in the blank. And yet we're called to be enough in this moment. The last several weeks as I've been reading through these two letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy, as I've been rereading, the Apostle Paul is instructing this young minister, Timothy, of how he is supposed to minister to the early church, how he is supposed to be. And if you caught on, this passage is about character. This passage is about character. Not anything that he's supposed to tell the church necessarily what they're supposed to do, but how they're supposed to be and how they are to be aligned. And so as I've been thinking about these scripture passages and these beautiful letters that have echoed throughout the ages, there's one man who I can't stop thinking about. There's one pastor I cannot stop thinking about. Pastor Bob. Most of you in here are like, who the heck is Pastor Bob? Pastor Bob is my father-in-law. 2 Sundays ago, I got the great honor to be at his final Sunday service. 50 years of pastoral ministry, 50 years of faithful pastoral ministry. I felt conflicted because it was also a Sunday that a very important congregational meeting was held here. And yet, as a young minister, I found holy ground celebrating a good and faithful pastor. So though the title of this sermon is From Nothing, the true title of today's sermon is Pastor Bob, because I'm about to tell you stories that are going to make you want to hire Pastor Bob and say, Danny was a good preacher, but wow. Because Pastor Bob as I call him, my father-in-law and I are always the early birds in the family. Every holiday, every family event, we are the ones up before the sun together, sipping piping hot coffee, solving the world's issues, usually laughing and talking. And here's something really important to know as well about Pastor Bob, as he would put it to all of you. Him and I come from different tribes, as he calls it. We pastor different flocks. We have different backgrounds of the people that we get to pastor. And yet there is a line he has told me for the last several years that I hold true in my own ministry, and especially in turbulent times of a ministry. He said to me, ministry is messy. Ministry is messy because people are messy. And people are beautiful. And you must remind them of the beauty within. I have held that so near and dear to my heart. And I often tell him, I told him yesterday on the phone, he's thriving in retirement, in case you're wondering, by the way. He lives on the western slope. He's on the Grand Mesa. He's fishing every day. He's befriended a fox and named him Max. And he feeds Max the fox a fish every single day. He's living a Dr. Seuss story. I promise you, he's having a great time. But I was on the phone with him yesterday, and I said, our relationship is a lot like that of the Apostle Paul and Timothy. That's actually a really terrible comparison, but for the painful sake of inserting myself in the text for a moment, that's what I'm going to use. Even though Pastor Bob nods in approval of women in ordination, Apostle Paul, maybe he would have come around by 2025, but I'm not so sure with all of that. Anyways, this is a sermon dedicated to the faithful ministry of this man for over 50 years, 30 years specifically in one congregation and one community. Paul instructs Timothy that godliness is found in contentment. Godliness is found great gain with the contentment with what we have. That's so countercultural to the world that we live in. The world tells us we need to have more. The world tells us we need to do more. The church is really good, too, at times, of wanting more and having all of these betters on top of it. Because we threw an amazing event last Sunday afternoon, and it was phenomenal. It was a great community event, a great turnout, and there was a committee the next day ready to make it bigger and better for next year. Because that's how the world has trained us. We need more people in the seats. We need more kids in the service, even though we might shush them in the service. We need more. We need to do more. No. Godliness is in contentment. I am enough. I have enough because Christ is enough. One of my father-in-law's, Pastor Bob's, first call was to a very small rural town, very small rural church with a very small salary. But they gave him a parsonage, which was 10 feet from the entrance of the church. And let me just take a moment and say, friends, there's a reason I live 30 minutes away. It's because I love you. And distance makes that love grow fonder. But my father-in-law, Pastor Bob, is a different breed of a pastor. Because for some beautiful reason, he still loved these people that lived 10 feet away from the entrance, that at all hours of the day would come knocking on his front door just to talk or ask something of him. Not only did he live 10 feet away from the entrance of the church, he worked other odd jobs. He tuned pianos. He worked with the local mortician. And he drove ambulances while being a senior pastor. And this wasn't to pad his own bank account. This wasn't to put more money in his own pocket. This wasn't for his retirement. It was, one, to pay his bills and support his family and children. He paid the church's bills out of his own earnings. He paid the church's bills while working 4 jobs. Now, later on in life, he did get to go to this beautiful community. It's called Cedar Edge, Colorado. It's right off of the Grand Mesa. And he got to move a mile away from the church. And he said, man, I am so much of a better pastor having that distance. 1 mile, that's all he needed, was 1 mile. You see, Paul is instructing young Timothy in ways to be, in character to hold, calling us to something higher. Nothing of the world, not wealth, not money, not successes, not materialistic possessions. No, but righteousness. Godliness, gentleness, love, and truth. Pastor Bob chose that direction in his life, chose for over 5 decades to constantly tune to what God called him to do. There were opportunities when he was offered bigger churches, bigger salaries, bigger pulpits. He was flown across the nation, offered these other positions. And yet God called him to pastor this one community for over 30 years. That 30 years wasn't always pretty. That 30 years came with division, came with hardship, came with moments of pain and ache, and he still showed up. And he still showed up faithfully. He showed up with love that wasn't just a sentiment. It wasn't just a, oh, I love you, good to see you. No, sometimes he showed up with the best biscuits and gravy in town. Sometimes he showed up at hospitals in the late night hours. Sometimes he showed up as love in a difficult conversation. He chose endurance when it would have been easier to leave. He chose endurance day after day, week after week, year after year. He exemplified what endurance of faith and fighting the good fight looks like. He chose truth. He chose truth. He stayed true to his convictions. He stayed true to his values. He stayed true to what God called him to do and remained truthful in love. And this is an important part. Grace without truth is, as what Bonhoeffer would say, is cheap grace. Truth without grace is cruelty. When we have the opportunity to show grace and truth, people encounter Jesus. When we can hold space, when we can hold tension of empathy and accountability, people encounter Jesus. Jesus exemplified in his ministry the importance of both. Because our world is so good at either or. We're either immediately on this side offering all the grace, all of the empathy with no accountability, with no truth. Or we become legalistic and we come over here and we're only truth and only accountability. Jesus, the Christ, has called us as a church to be the example for the world that says we can live in both. We can hold tension in both. We can hold space for both. And in doing so, we share the true gospel, the good news that ministry is messy, the good news that people are messy, but people are beautiful in their mess. This part of the service I've thought about keeping out of the service because I think it makes me not look as great, but I'm going to lift up Pastor Bob for a minute. In 50 years of pastoral ministry, Pastor Bob never took a sabbatical. In 50 years of ministry, he never took a sabbatical. Friends, I'm counting down the days to my sabbatical. I'm 18 months in, and my sabbatical is already the theology of sandy beaches with no cell phone service. Every year, he denied a raise. Every year they offered a raise, he said, I need you to hire people to be with me. I need to hire people to surround me. Thankfully, a few years ago, his board lovingly forced a raise on him. This passage from the Apostle Paul talks about generosity, talks about what it looks like to do good in the world, what it looks like to share and be generous. And all of these characteristics are who my father-in-law is. If I could be half the minister he can be, I might be able to call myself a good and faithful pastor. Pastor Bob understood something that the world doesn't teach us. It's something that we learn in a deep relationship with Christ. How we align ourselves with who Christ called us to be. How we align ourselves to higher things. Remembering that we came from nothing. We came from nothing. And we can take nothing with us. And more important than the possessions you leave behind in this world is the legacy you leave behind. So today, the question for all of us to consider, whether you're leading in ministry or not, the question to consider is, what is your legacy? Who do you want to be? How can you be this example as Pastor Bob is, as the Apostle Paul is, to someone younger than you? Who is it in your life that has been that example to you? How can we continue this message of good news in the world, not wavering in our convictions or our values, holding space for both to coexist, and remembering how messy life can be? But it's when we courageously step into the mess, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to put down our boxing gloves and stop shouting, that we truly allow the work of Christ to be exemplified through us, and that's what we leave behind. Because, friends, from nothing, in the hands of God, everything can be made beautiful. Amen.